Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. It's time. That time every week. He's talking to you about some cool stuff. It's Crime Time with Dr. Steve Albrecht. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Producer Matt. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time Podcast Episode 51. 51. Nice, huh? I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht. I'm joining you from the Acts Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. For this hour, I'll be talking about gunshot detectors with my guest, Kathleen Griggs, president of Buoy Corporation based in Vienna, Virginia. Her firm has created a product called ShotPoint for real-time shot detection and shooter localization. This device has important connections to the prevention of workplace violence in K-12 and college and university violence and helping police identify mass attackers at the earliest they can. It's really fascinating technology. We'll be talking to her about how she got into this work and what this system means, especially in the prevention of school and workplace violence. So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We'll talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes, and we'll even mention a few stupid crooks. And most importantly, I'll talk to you about what you can do to keep yourself safe and your family safe from crime and violence. As always, you need to be vigilant at home and in your neighborhood and in your community and at school and at work and even on the road. Remember last week we talked about road rage. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years as a patrol officer, a reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant and teach training workshops focusing on human resources, employee coaching, workplace violence prevention, and security issues in the workplace. I've written 23 books on business, workplace violence, police subjects, and guns, all of which you can find on Amazon. My 3 gun books are available on Amazon Kindle. Albrecht on Guns, Albrecht and Farrow on Guns, Volume 2, and then Albrecht on Guns, Volume 3. You can always reach me at my website at crimetimeradio.com, where you can send me an email. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Dr. Steve Albrecht. That's ALBRECHT. And then you can also connect with me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. You can find past episodes of the show on SoundCloud.com and new episodes every week. We always tape on YouTube and Facebook. So thanks to my colleague Patrick Field from PVF Security Consulting for introducing us. Kathleen, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine. How are you, Steve?
Well,
and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick and I are old friends. We go way back. I trust him implicitly, and he is telling me about some of the work that you're doing, and it's really foreshadowing something that I have been thinking about for about 20 years now, which is, and I'm embarrassed to admit this to you, but when I was working at a consulting practice in San Diego in 99, and end of 99, beginning of 2000, a guy came to us and said he had a shot detector, a ballistic shot detector. He explained the concept to us, and I said, what would you use that for? I mean, at that time, I was the workplace violence guy, and I'd written the first book in the country back in 1994, and I'd been covering workplace violence issues since, interviewing a murder, a double murder, workplace murder in prison, and then all my work up to, this is pre-Columbine. And I said, well, what could possibly this thing do? Why would we care? And the more he explained it, the less I sort of understood it. And this shows my naivete back in 99 and 2000, that I just didn't understand how this concept of a bullet detector, a shot localizer, could be useful in the workplace violence prevention arena for schools and for churches and for workplaces. And I just didn't also see the connection to how the police would want to know that. And so, my naive exposure back in those days is really kind of embarrassing now when I talk to you, because this is your life's work and it's a product which needs to exist. So tell me where I went wrong in terms of was the technology not explainable enough to the layperson like me back in those days? What was it that could have made this sale for this concept in general earlier?
I think we still face that same problem today with most people. This is still an emerging technology in the market. It's an emerging concept in the market that you would have a device that's going to alert the police department to a shooter in a building. I would definitely say that there's only a top tier of security managers that are really thinking about this, and I think have truly understood that the benefits and the rationale. And there's still a good portion of the world out there that doesn't see, that doesn't understand. And I think it is a communication issue. It's framing the argument in terms of why would we spend, and also I think some other systems have higher cost than our system does, but why would we spend the money to put something in this building when the odds of an active shooter in this particular spot might be low? And so I think it's the we're going to go ahead and take the chance that it's not going to happen here argument versus put something in.
Yeah, and you look at the evolution now in the past 20 years of workplace violence and mass attacks and school violence. Now we certainly have Columbine. We have in our rearview mirror, we have the Las Vegas shooting in our rearview mirror. We have things like Sandy Hook. We have the church shootings in Texas. I mean, so the protocol has certainly been laid for this type of system and these devices now, because now we're trying to get people out of harm's way. We're trying to get the police to the location as quickly as possible. We're trying to isolate the shooter. We're trying to figure out, as your system doesn't looks at the trajectory of the gunfire. Things like that are significantly important now. And you think about how this concept of workplace violence has evolved in the last 20 years. When I started in '92, it was all about, the post office and going postal, and there was sort of that mindset that that's where these things happen. Well, fast forward to where we are now: schools, churches, movie theaters, workplaces of all types, factories and office locations. And then, I think your system also, the ShotPoint system, has the definite connection to what the police are trying to do especially in some of these dangerous cities around the country, where we're trying to localize where these shots are coming from, oftentimes from gang members and other folks that, solve their problems with guns. So your timing for this, and I know that you've been working on this for, I think, since 2014, correct?
Oh, actually, we started well in advance of that.
Okay.
Because this was a Department of Defense technology, and I was with you in terms of I had not visualized that this was something that was going to be a public safety or commercial system back when we started back in 2006 is when I first got the very first contract award to transition or mature this technology. This was a defense research technology that was developed out of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And that was the vision was tactical. The vision is this is something that's going to protect a forward operating base from, fires, right? Going into areas where you're in combat. And it really was something that we were just thinking about that as its only purpose. And something happened in around 2014 where we were making the transition out of the military, because at that time the wars in Afghanistan were rolling back. There was a lot of money for putting equipment out there in the buildup, and then a lot of that went away. And so we were faced with, well, I think we're going to be out of the business. I don't know if this is going to go on with DoD. And then we got invited to go out to a school in Idaho. And they wanted an indoor gunshot detection system to integrate with a camera system. And it was a shooter emergency application. So we went out and we tried it, and we realized that this is something that our distributed sensor network, our particular type of technology, works really well indoors. And, that got us thinking that this is something that we think really might have real applications for indoor safety. And particularly in combination with video.
And going out to Idaho, was that driven by some event that had happened in the state or in their particular area? I mean, oftentimes these cases and any advancements in security technology are driven by events.
It actually wasn't the reason. So they had a broadband camera network, and their idea was that if there was an emergency in the school, they wanted to rapidly send video into the sheriff's department. And they were trying to think of, well, what's going to cue the cameras, right? What's going to alert these cameras to this emergency? And the only thing they can think of was, well, maybe if we brought in a gunshot detection system, we could alert the cameras. And therefore, and that's why we came out. They actually literally weren't thinking of gunshot detection until they realized that they needed to have a scenario where these cameras would be somehow alerted to an emergency situation to make the rest of the system look good. But that really brings me to the point of what acoustic localization means in life-saving in an emergency situation, because people think about cameras, right, as being, well, they're out there, I feel safe, I've got cameras, someone's watching. But no, cameras don't alert to in a real-time life-threatening emergency. Acoustics is what you want. I mean, if you think about it, ask a camera, tell me if there's a life-threatening emergency happening. How's the camera going to know? And ask an acoustic sensor. Well, acoustic sensor can detect gunshots, can detect screams, can detect crashes, all those things that are alerts, things that alert humans to life-threatening emergencies. Those are all acoustic types of alerts. And acoustic systems are the thing to do. I mean, that's what's a true life safety technology. Cameras aren't life safety technologies, but if you put them together with an acoustic alerting system, a camera can give you a lot more information and context around this what's happening in that life safety event or life-threatening event, but it's not the thing that's going to alert you to that life-threatening event.
Yeah, I think the other issue that some people
It's a combination.
they don't consider is that so many cameras, and you know this from your work, and so many cameras in this country are not monitored, and so there's a sense from some people that there must be somebody on the other side watching what's going on here in this bank or in this school or something. I mean, it's so rare. You've seen it in your work in the government and defense systems where we have monitored camera systems for certain critical areas, but so much of it is just, a static camera that does nothing. Sometimes they don't even move. I mean, the camera just sits there, and I go to lots of facilities. I know Patrick Field does as well. We do a site assessments, and the camera can't be moved. It's not. There's no point to zoom capability, and you say, well, this is a fixed location, and maybe if somebody happens to be wandering by and looks into the room where the camera is, the monitor is housed, and I'm always trying to get supervisors and managers to put these things onto their desktops, especially in government situations where they can see what's happening at the counter. Can't even get them to do that. So you're right, this idea that there has to be a driver of some type of an event, an acoustic event. And when you think about all this technology, I read your bio and I looked at your team, and you have some impressive scientific folks there, and your background in physics and things. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this work.
How did I get into well, that's a very long story. So let's pick a date in terms of I've spent my life doing defense research.
Yeah.
So of various kinds. So we could call it an addiction. I think my dreams were fulfilled in defense research when I had the opportunity to be at DARPA, and so that was an amazing experience. And as I became a DARPA agent. So I was a government person. I had a lot of responsibility, but also, the thrill of having the ability to create technologies that were really going to help the world. And DARPA gives you that freedom. They'll fund something that's a high risk, just based on an idea that if it worked out, it's going to have a big payoff. And so, where else in the world can you do that? So that's really what got me into this, is because most of my programs were tactical technologies. It was all about video registration, how to provide the human with information they needed. How do we filter this information so that human gets it right away so that they can conduct a tactical mission. So there's just been a lot of history with the various programs that I've been involved in and managed that brought me to this.
So you look at your background, you have
the gunshot detection problem is similar. Yeah.
You have a physics background and an engineering background, and I think about my dad, Johns Hopkins graduate in 63. And in physics, my dad was an aeronautical physicist, and he came out to, the way we got out to California, San Diego, was he was making drones to take pictures of the Russians. And think about how big that technology was in terms of the size of the drone. I mean, back in 62, when he was working on these systems, we came out to California in 68, and he was working for a company called Teledyne Ryan, and T. Claude Ryan built Charles Lindbergh's plane. And so, think about the drones were as big as a room. And now the technology is, you can put it in a briefcase and carry it onto a plane. And so it's fascinating to me how the scientific world has the evolution of change in terms of things are faster, smaller, more efficient, better. Think about the computer systems you looked at when you started in your career compared to the software and the hardware that we have now. It's stunning. So did you really kind of have to wait for the in terms of the acoustic and ballistic technology, did you have to wait for the technology to sort of catch up to what you could make for clients in terms of how they could afford it and how they could store it and all that type of stuff, where it had to get sized correctly?
Or I thought you were going to say, did I have to wait for the technology to catch up with my thinking? So yes, and we're still doing that. I mean, there's still things that people think are going to be impossible. I see this acoustic localization as a building block for future systems that can ride on this network and, further mitigate the active shooter response, because what we're not doing is controlling and cueing robots or robotic technologies. And I've seen some people, this is a little bit far out when you think about the fact that the building can start to respond, right? But we have sprinkler systems that respond to fire detection. So, there are mitigating technologies that could be in place. Could they be safely controlled? And, but it all starts with accurate sensing and localization, because, this is all about making sure that, making sure that the environment is safe. So, but yeah, I have a lot of future ideas, even beyond this. And when we started this program, I knew this was a future idea. I just didn't realize how futuristic it really was. The reason we've been doing this a long time is because I think it's taken a while for the world to, start thinking about, using this modality as part of the security system.
When you think about ShotPoint as a system, it's basically, and put it in my non-scientific terms, it's a series of, just to put it in rough language, highly tuned microphones and speaker systems that is connected to software. Tell me what the system looks like physically.
There are a couple of things that are, they really are just microphones. And you'll hear people say, well, I use a special, acoustics transducer. And well, that's just a microphone. A microphone is sensing sound pressure. They are microphones, but they're microphones that happen to be tuned or sensitive to a range that is compatible with a gunshot signature. And meaning that most microphones that you use on your cell phone, they're tuned for voice. And if a gunshot goes off, it's gonna rail. It's not gonna give you good information. So these microphones, we have to be sure that if something extremely powerful happens next to it, it's still gonna hang in there. It's gonna give us good information. So there are particular microphones we look for. The other thing that's important about our sensor is that it is an array. Imagine you have two ears, right, and they're separated by a certain distance, 6-7 inches across your head. Elephants have a bigger head. So, and that's how you help localize. So we have a 4-sensor array. So we get good localization out of our sensors. And that's important in the long run, because you want to know exactly where that shooter is. You don't want to just say, I detected something. You want to localize. And the other reason for localization is we have a multi-sensor system. This is a complex system. Multi-sensor system allows us to ask both sensors, does this sound that happened from this localized source, does this really look like a gunshot from where you are? And that takes into account the fact that sound dissipates, right, as it moves through the air. So, we have equations for that, and that's how we get it exactly right. And the reason why all that's important is because you don't want the system to go off 5 times a day.
Right.
Right. If you don't,
the
you're
false
not
alarm
really careful, this thing's going to go off. I have seen systems. I'm not going to name names, but there are a lot of systems out there that can't get that false alarm rate down, and that's because they're using a single sensor, and they don't have the experience and the system concept that we are implementing. So what we want is a system that stays in your environment, never reports anything as a gunshot that's not a gunshot, and and is also there. We can send in other information too. Our system's always on. So if you're interested in screams and bangs or other things that you want to be alerted to, we can send those as well. But we don't want to report a gunshot and cause, which is really effectively a 911 call.
Right.
4 times a day. And if you can't resolve those false alarms, then that user's not going to want that system after a while.
So when you look at how a gunshot sound is analyzed, as I understand the technology, every caliber of bullet, 45, 9mm, 10mm, 40, 38, 22, military rifles, has its own acoustic signature. So does the software, because I mean, you've tested you've shot guns, or you've got the ballistic signature of each of these, so it knows exactly what it hears when it says that's a gunshot. It's not a car backfire. It's not a light bulb being dropped. It's not something that's sounds like a gunshot that people sometimes misunderstand, even in emergencies. They go, it doesn't sound like a gunshot. It sounds like a firecracker. So you've got
Right.
like a fingerprint. You've got a ballistic signature for each of these calibers, right?
Well, we do. But I'm going to tell you, this is a hard problem because there are certain, so what an acoustic signature of a gun, the acoustic signatures that we're looking for off the guns are muzzle blast, and then the shock wave that propagates from a supersonic bullet. Those are, and there's a couple other things that happen, outgassing of the guns, but a muzzle blast is a little blast wave, right? And so is a firework. A firework is also a blast wave. And so even though we have these fingerprints, the fingerprints are, what we do is we look at certain parameters, we analyze those parameters, and we can separate out shots from non-shots. But in some cases, when you're trying to separate a 38 from 38 and 357 are close, 40 from a 357 from a 9mm, you're not always going to get it to be 100% right, because there's going to be some characteristics, depending on how far away you are, that overlap, and even the direction that the shooter is pointing. I mean, the direction the shooter is pointing is a huge variable, because guns are, when you're pointing directly at the sensor with your gun, you get a lot different signature than the sensor that's behind the gun.
Right.
And if we could ask the shooter to stand this way, face the gun, face the sensor, read and shoot, perfect classification. But because we don't know which orientation the shooter is, we have to assume that this could be the back of a 357 or the side of a 22. So some of these things do overlap. So it's harder than you think, but we get it right. We're really, in terms of classification, we get it right around 90+% of the time.
Right. Which is enough to get the police.
We'll get that in the right category.
Yeah, the police.
Well, the police just want to know. I mean, certainly we'll tell you whether this is we'll tell you whether it's a rifle or not. Those are easy. Some things are easier to separate than others. Whether there's multiple shots going, a burst happening, these are kinds of things that police want to know right away. And that we can send them.
When you look at perpetrators that may use suppressed barrels, they put, people call them silencers. They're not really silencers. They're more like suppressors. That changes the digital signature, that makes it more difficult to identify it, or it does not?
Well, no, of course. It suppresses the signature, and it's there to suppress the acoustic signature. So I mean, I don't want to comment. I know I can tell you that some are harder than others. Some we're good with, some we're not. But typically the ones that are harder are the smaller caliber weapons, like so.
So if you look at shot point as a device that you're trying to get into really strategic locations in a school or a hospital, or a high likelihood event of workplace violence or a robbery, retail environment, something like that. I mean, you're not necessarily putting it in every real estate office in the country. We want to put them into those locations where the likelihood of these things is happening. So K through 12 schools, colleges and universities, a place where a mass attack might be possible. Certainly a retail environment, healthcare. What's the perfect sort of location for you? I mean, tell me, not physically, but what's your ideal clients? The things I talked about, healthcare, retail, things like that. What schools? What are your ideal clients for the system?
Well, first I want to make one comment on the other question that you had. If it's a rifle suppressor, we're going to get that rifle every time, because the bullet you can't suppress a bullet.
Right.
So just a comment there. So we get trajectories off of rifle bullets, and also that's if the shooter's really far away, we're still going to pick up that bullet. So that's what enables us to pick out things like that Mandalay Bay incident.
Right.
If we had our sensors around that, if we had our sensors around the event area at Harvest 91, we would have been able to localize that shooter with every shot.
Right.
That's an important point, even though he was almost 400 meters away.
Yeah, and it's such a chaotic environment. How much information can you get to the police, and how soon can you get it to them is so important.
Right. They were really, I think, less than a minute away. could they have the right information? So think about that. But okay, in terms of, where do we think the next event's going to happen? Well, so I want to separate two questions there. One is, where is it likely to happen? And two, is this a mass shooting by definition is something where multiple people are going to be getting shot. So we're not, if we are in every single, hotel room and office, then we're going to detect, somebody coming in and, popping their boss. But we're really thinking about right now on the early entry market is places where large members of the public are going to gather, so where there's a likelihood that after the first shot, if you are not responding when that first shot occurs, then more death is going to happen, right? So the whole point is saving lives in mass shootings. So that's where we focus on areas where there's, kind of an intersection between it's more likely to happen in this type of place based on, historical data, and more likely there's going to be a lot of victims in this area that we need to respond quickly to.
Like a mall, for example.
Malls, shopping malls. Malls, there's a lot of mass shootings that have happened in malls over the years. Hospital emergency rooms. Schools, believe it or not, are dangerous places.
Sure.
They are, you have a 1 in 50 pre-COVID, 1 in 52 chance, right? So when people say it's not going to happen here, go look at the data. It's going to happen in a school with a lot higher likelihood than it would happen, maybe even a place where you would think, would be less safe. But people think a school should be a safe environment, but statistically, for active shooters, it's less safe than a lot of other places. So that's another one. Retail, entertainment, places where, so we're in an area like casinos, where people might, have, people are drawn to it, and those are lots of members of the public, and things could go really bad if the shooting happened. There are a lot of, mass casualties. So any place where there's a mass casualty possibility and you're open to the public and you have some high risk factors, that's where we want to be.
And yeah, I would say like, mega churches, we get 3 and 4 or 5, 6,000 people for services.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. There was a program, and we haven't really benefited too much from that, because on, houses of worship grant, what we need are more houses of worship to apply for grants for gunshot detection. They need to be more aware that this technology is here and how well it works. So that's so it's a chicken and egg. They don't tend to have a lot of money, and they don't tend to be aware that they can apply for government grants to get the money.
So take me through the police part, because I remember back in my police days, we would get these alarms that would have a robotic voice that would say there's a robbery at this location here. Was a trigger for that, and the idea that the police now have mobile data terminals in their cars and can be updated instantaneously from dispatch as they're driving to the call, and they have their radios now are in their ears, and in my day we didn't have earpieces. We just carried radios around, their $1,500 electronic brick. So the response to the patrol officer in leaving his or her car and going into the situation is continuous and ongoing for the communication. How does your system, take it from, let's say it hears the gunshot, how does it contact the police dispatchers, and what happens from there?
That's a great question. I think every police department is different. So I'm going to say that, number one. We've worked with 2 types of users. One is a school resource officer and connected to a police department where there might be an active shooter in a school. In that scenario, we have implementations where they've done a lot of training. They fired hundreds of shots, which has been a great learning experience for us, because we've been able to tweak the user interface around their needs and how to improve their response to this. But typically, what happens is that we send the messages out to an application, which is basically a browser app that sits in the 911 dispatch center. And then we also send text messages. And with each shop report, we grab an image off the camera. The image is the image comes from the exact moment of the shot. So we're very careful to make sure we get it from the exact timestamp. The most likely you're going to get that shooter before they have a chance to put their hand down. So you'll positively identify the shooter. And then we have a pre and post video, so you can see a little bit of before and after with every shot. So anyone who's in a position to click on that and review that we'll get a lot of information about who they're looking for and also the victims.
So,
but in terms of, yeah,
in some police MDT terminals, the officers can get live video feed. They can get photographs that are sent right to the screen. So that would be, if the technology exists in their PD, you can send them real-time photos and video feeds, things like that, or the system can.
Yes, so that goes out to everyone. But the first thing it does is typically the way they use it is that the dispatcher is going to be seeing this. They're going to be reviewing this, and they're going to be calling this in, and they're going to be talking to the responder over radio. And so that dispatcher, in that kind of a scenario, they don't, training goes out the window, right? They're not expecting this to happen. Suddenly they're in and they're shaking. They can't click on their mouse. It has to be easy enough for them. And what they have to do is just read the text. So we actually include the information in the format of the text message, in the format of the shot message. It'll say shooter, Blake High School, 3rd floor, back hall. I mean, we give direction information right in that shot report text message. And that's typically what the dispatcher will say over the radio. And that's how that's where the responders get their first bit of information before they ever look down. Now, in the outside, we've had situations where we have police that actually do read the mobile text, and they will look at the image. And again, it is that direction information that I think turns out to be the most critical. If you get that message wrong, they're going to go to the wrong place.
Right.
So in that situation, hearts are pounding. They don't necessarily read past the first part of the message. So at least not right away. And so that's gonna get them angrier than anything, is if that text message takes them to the wrong place. So that's.
So I guess I didn't think about this until you mentioned it, but your system really benefits being connected to a camera system every time, right? So people say, well, we don't want to spend the money on a camera system. We just want the shot point system. That would be not a useful approach, right? The camera system is really the driver for the imagery that the police need to respond. So it has to be it's the audio and the visual, right? It has to be there.
Well, it doesn't have to be there. Obviously, the system works without it. And certainly there's a very famous system that works completely without it. It'll just get you there, and you'll look around for your, shell casings. We like the idea, if there's an available, we like the idea of integrating with the camera because, one, it gives you much more information. Well, so our system will tell you a shot went off, a crime has happened. The camera will give you, the suspect identity, and then where the suspect is going and whether there are victims, right? So those are all all bits of information. That's additional detail that I think helps, with the response. And my other view is that, like you said before, when we started, we talked about the fact that, there are these watch centers. I mean, there's video surveillance cameras everywhere. Typically, we go to a place where, they have so much crime, they put up lots and lots of cameras hoping to do something about it.
Right.
And so we go in with our system and we just simply enable that video surveillance network to give them the information they need. So, yeah. And even then, after we put the system in, then they go back and they look and they go, oh, we need more cameras. So,
for sure. Right.
They usually make the decision that they don't have good camera coverage after they see, places where, after they see what full coverage means.
I know Patrick Field and I always laugh about how people rely on cameras that when you look at the image, the technology is so outdated and the camera is so ancient that you're like, oh, is this a mammal? I mean, we can't even figure out, age, race, height, weight, nothing. It's just a blob on the screen. When you look at
I can tell you blobs. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we have so we've been in scenarios where I would say I don't believe there is an indoor system that has so far gotten a live an actual event, but we've seen actual events in the outdoor environment, and in a lot of cases, we have the event, we have the location. And then when you pull up that imagery, you really have to struggle to see what that blob is doing. Is that blob raising their hand right about there? And then, this is how bad most of the video really is. But it puts those two things together. And then you get information about, well, that blob came out of that car. And then so there's still an investigation because the camera, you're right, is not is not perfect.
So the human piece has always got to be there. The responding patrol officers are ones that've got to interpret what they've seen, what they hear, what they see when they get there. When you look at the post 9/11 world and the creation of fusion centers, so in a perfect world, would this be real-time data video that's coming into a fusion center as well?
I mean, in a mass casualty event, absolutely, right? You know, there's no reason why they can't put it everywhere,
right?
Because there's no limit to who gets to subscribe to it. It doesn't burden your system to be a subscriber. So absolutely, in that what it does is it takes away the fog from what's happening and allows you to just start on the page of setting up your tactical response, knowing everybody has the same data. I mean, there's a great story, not a great story, but Sandy Hook, where, you know, or I'm sorry, the Aurora Theater too had the same situation where the 911 calls were delayed, so people would spot an officer and they would call that in as maybe the shooter. And when you have that screwing up your response, you know, it extends out. It just creates this, you know, nest of. It just turns a mass casualty situation into a catastrophe, right? So if you can eliminate that fog, that's all this is doing, and then they can go right in, knowing everybody's on the same page all the time. That's what it would do.
So I want to give you a little boost here. You may have seen this article. I sent it to Patrick Feo. It's from September 22nd, 2020. It's written by a woman named Kara, K-A-R-A Grant. The piece comes from Voice of San Diego. It's a kind of alt weekly that comes out in San Diego. It's called Shot Spotter Sensors Send SDPD Officers to False Alarms More Than Advertised. And the piece talks about how the San Diego PD, where I came from, has these sensors in these 4 neighborhoods in southeast San Diego where a lot of shootings tend to happen. And the criticism of the system, you don't have to talk about them particularly, but the criticism of the system is the false alarm rate. And so they're coming up to the end of this. This is a public article. I'm not you know, creating thin air here. It was on the internet. The system's contract's coming to an end, and they're trying to make a decision as to whether to continue, but because the false alarm rate for them has been pretty substantial. So when you look at your technology, how do you say, you know, based on the ballistic acoustic signatures of these things, and you're trying to be, as you said, you know, 95% or higher, how does the system account for, in the 3 minutes we have left, how does the system account for false alarms?
Well, false alarms, that's a really, really good point. And I just want to say what that illustrates is how difficult this problem is. I want to pat myself on the back and our company because we've been able to solve a really hard problem. And so indoors, we have had 0 false alarms, years and years of deployment, all kinds of things, all kinds of noise events, bangs, anything else that's been happening inside middle schools, high schools. Outdoors, we did run into an issue this summer, I'm going to be honest, with unprecedented use of heavy fireworks. And so when I say 95, 97%, 96%, that is how we go up against separating heavy fireworks from a gunshot.
Right.
And so we eliminate our overall false alarm rate would be 99% because we're eliminating everything else. But we do it because we're closer. Our spacing is closer. So our plan is eventually we're hoping to go in all the streetlights. So we do go. Our system has to be 50, 60 meter separation, and ShotSpotter their sensors are a lot further apart, so they have a harder problem. They don't get as much information that we get that we can put into our classifier.
So the array is
important.
So
we're able to get. Yeah, our spacing is important because we need to get that information so that we can separate this out. And it does work. And we do have we can separate it out. Most fireworks, there's probably, like I said, this 2 to 5%. And in that case, when our system is, wow, a couple of the sensors are voting shot, a couple of them are voting firework, we're going to put out we have a report, we're going to send that to the police department with all the information we have and say, look, this is a probable. We want you to pay attention to this. Open this up, take a look. But it eliminates everything else. It's not just complete, we're not blind. We're
right.
And that's only in those particular cases. Obviously, 4th of July is over, so that's that's not happening right now. But that is, there are some particular fireworks that do have a lot of characteristics that that could fool a sensor. I'm going to say that honestly, but I think that we've solved it in the sense that there's no alarm fatigue, and certainly we're not, we're able to report that information as accurately as possible.
Kathleen, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you. You have a website they can get a hold of more information about your system and about ShotPoint.
databuoycorp.com, and let me spell that out. DATABUOY.com. Or sorry,
Corp.
Let me try this again. Yeah. DATABUOY Corp.com.
Right.
And
Kathleen, I wish your system didn't have to exist, just like I wish my work didn't have to exist in workplace violence prevention. But look where we are now in the world. I mean, the only thing good about the pandemic, from my perspective, is that it keeps people away from the office, and we haven't had the mass shootings that we've seen so much, in last year and the years before that. But what you're doing is important work, and I think that your technology is bridging that gap for the police response to be even faster, more specific, and more located. So I really commend you, and I thank you for what you're doing.
And thank you so much for having me. And
please pass my regards on to Patrick
being
Field.
On the show.
Yeah, Patrick Field's a good friend of mine and a good guy. So my guest has been Kathleen Griggs, the CEO of Data Buoy Corporation. That's databuoycorp.com. Kathleen, thanks very much for your time this day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care. Thanks. Now it's time for one of my favorite parts of the show, Crime Time's Stupidest Crook of the Week. This is where I get to talk about some of our dumbest criminals who managed to get themselves arrested based on their monumental stupidity. Okay, Dateline, Brazil. 2 burglars rifling through an apartment were disturbed by police and jumped out of a window with a stash of jewelry. Soon afterwards, they got away, and soon afterwards, the police picked up 2 men who were acting suspiciously. I don't know what that means, but maybe they just acted suspiciously. While in custody, one man became violently ill and needed hospital treatment. X-rays showed the problem: 2 rings, a pendant, and a necklace, all swallowed in haste. After a swift surgery, the apartment owner identified the jewelry, and the police arrested both men. So don't be swallowing your jewelry as you go down, because it doesn't come out real effectively, and sometimes it sits in your stomach and can be quite painful. That's our stupid crook of the week. A Crime Time IQ test. Let's test your Crime Time IQ test, or this week's crime quiz question. Speaking of jewel thieves, what was the biggest jewel theft case in history? The biggest jewel theft case in history. Think of the movie The Pink Panther, and think of all the other, the Crown Affair and things like that, the movies you've seen with jewel thieves. The Antwerp diamond heist, dubbed the heist of the century, was by far the largest diamond heist and one of the largest robberies in history. Thieves stole loose diamonds, gold, silver, other types of jewelry valued at more than $100 million. When you look at it, it took place in February 15th and 16th, 2003 in Antwerp, Belgium. The reason it took place over 15 and 16 of February in 2003 was because the bad guys broke in and took their time. Though arrests were made and time was served by some of the crooks, most of the diamonds, of the $100 million worth of diamonds stolen, were not recovered. The vault was housed in on 2 floors. Below the main floor, it was protected by multiple security systems, including a lock with 100 million possible combinations, infrared heat detectors, a seismic sensor, Doppler radar, and a magnetic field. The building itself had a private security force and was located in the heavily guarded and monitored Antwerp Diamond District. The theft was carried out by a 5-man team led by Leonardo Notar Bartolo, a professional thief who was skilled in social manipulation. He was caught and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He got out, and the $100 million worth of jewelry is still outstanding. Crime Time Safety Tech, time to change your computer passwords. Don't forget to change your cell phone passcode as well every now and then. The list of passwords to be changed is long, and it's hard to do, so make sure you do the changes in stages, not all at once. Start by prioritizing your passwords and that connect anything to do with your banking or your money, your accounts, your PayPal, your savings accounts, stock market accounts. Do those first. Move on to any online accounts where you pay your bills, so you have your debit or banking information stored. Don't forget to change your social media account passwords like Facebook and Twitter. So thanks for listening to this week's episode of Crime Time. Thanks to my guest, Kathleen Griggs, the CEO of Data Buoy Corporation. That's databuoycorp.com. I encourage you to go to my website at crimetimeradio.com and send me an email with questions or topics you want me to cover on future shows. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Dr. Steve Albrecht. Follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. Next week, we'll talk to Frederick Lane. He's an attorney and the author of a new book on cybercrime and protecting your kids from online predators. In our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves. Too many people are sheep and too few people are shepherds. There are a lot of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all, so you need to be a shepherd. Take care of yourself and protect your family and your loved ones, your friends, your co-workers. Pay attention, be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a good witness for the police. If you see a crime, stay safe and aware and alert at home, at work, at school, and even on the road. Thanks for listening to Crime Time. Thanks to producer Matt. Thanks to Jim Whining for all his support and the good folks at Axe Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht. Thanks for listening to What I Know is Right.